And it's a fascinating topic.
Yes, and especially with evolution, we go to and we look at fossil evidence for human evolution. And those fossils that you see there are all the different skulls that have been found and that our study is about today. I think the biggest question, Lorraine, is normally that people want to know, where do we come from? Who are we and where do we come from? And where do we fit in the animal kingdom? Now, if you look at the biological classification there, we as humans, we belong to the kingdom, the phylum, subphylum, etc. But look at the order. We all belong to the order primates. So yes, we are part and form part of the primate family.
So our closest relatives are other primates. And while we're saying this, we know that some people have a problem with this whole story of human evolution. Let's remind ourselves that it's not only a theory. It is a theory because there's a whole body of evidence for what we are going to tell you today. And because you're going to get questions of 43 marks on this topic, follow through the thinking with us, and please ask questions if you have. Right, we are primates, and there you can see the evolutionary pedigree or the tree of life. And this is from a book written by McCarthy and Rubich that tells us about life in Africa and specifically in southern Africa, and it's a fascinating book. And if you can see there on the picture that the origin of our origin is somewhere earlier, much earlier than 55 million years ago. And at some stage around 45 or 35 million years ago, there was a split into, on the right-hand side, the red lines, the prosimians, and on the left, what we call the anthropoids. And there you can see, right on the left, more than 8 million years ago, there was a split between what became humans and what became chimpanzees. We did not evolve from a chimpanzee. We have a common ancestor though, but that split happened more than 8 million years ago. So what happened? And why are we uniquely human? That is the story, what we're going to tell you today.
So we're showing you this phylogenetic tree because you are supposed to know the relationships between all these organisms, and our relationship with the other apes on this phylogenetic tree, who is closest related to us, and a way that you can find it, and this was last year's, you can see there, November 2014, paper 2. And this was the phylogenetic tree that was given to you, and then you were given questions on it. Now, I have just highlighted that same diagram now, but with the questions there.
Yeah, this, just to interrupt you, Colin, this is exactly the same phylogenetic tree. Well, a more detailed one as far as the human ancestors are concerned, but it's the same type of diagram that we had with the red and yellow and the blue with the pictures. So you need to be able to interpret these phylogenetic trees. Colin, this was an interesting question that they asked last year. And the first one there that you highlighted, the yellow, was the first question where they had to say which organism, Paranthropus boisei, that is, or Homo habilis, which one appeared first? And there you highlighted them in yellow.
I think it's important that our grade 12 learners should know that the 0 is current time. This is where we are now.
Yeah.
we speak together, eh? And as we move further to the left, the older it becomes, because then it is millions of years ago. So 2.5 million years ago was much older or later than 2 million years ago.
Yeah, rather, let's say earlier in time. Yeah.
Yes, earlier in time, which means that which one will be or appeared first? The one that's older, of course, and that is, if you can derive from there, it's Homo habilis.
That is the top one, in other words, because you can see the yellow started earlier than the bottom line.
And what I like about this phylogenetic tree also is that we can see that these organisms, it's not a linear development and evolutionary line, because you can see that there are, for instance, Australopithecus africanus and Australopithecus what is that?
Ethiopicus.
Oh, Ethiopicus.
Yeah, it's a bit
Not
far
that you have
for
to
you
know.
to
Yeah,
see
I
here.
can't see, and I don't have my glasses on, so I better put this on now. You can see that they live at the same time, at a certain stage, but they died out and they still lived on. And this is very significant that you must see where they overlap, and that is exactly the second question. Name two species whose existence on Earth overlapped with that of Homo erectus. So what do you need to do? You first need to go and look for Homo erectus and then see which other species overlapped. And if you go down, you can see there's 4 different species that actually lived at the same
top
time as Homo erectus. There you can see is Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
There you can see is Homo habilis. If you go further down, you can see there's Paranthropus robustus and Paranthropus boisei.
Which
So you
means
could-
that there are 4 possible answers and they
Exactly.
only had to give 2. Yeah, and that is to your advantage.
And another type of question that you can see there, which organism was the direct ancestor of Homo habilis? So they derive from which one? And there you can see definitely Australopithecus africanus.
The
You can see
Australopithecus
there,
afarensis, there
afarensis,
you
there
can
you can
see.
see afarensis, because afarensis, you can see there, they Australopithecus.
Let me show you because I'm closer, I can see the picture. You have no idea of what it's
Picture
like
is
here.
a little bit small from here, where I sit.
They ask the direct ancestor of Homo habilis. So you go back with a line, Homo habilis. There it joins another line, so you go back until you get to another organism. And if you look at it, it says Australopithecus afarensis. Now, the second question was list 5 characteristics that are shared by all the organisms in the above phylogenetic tree. We'll get to that now. But then there was also how long did Australopithecus africanus exist on Earth? So you go and Australopithecus africanus, let's find it. There it is. And there you can see from about 3 million years ago until 2 million years ago. So you subtract the one from the other, and your answer then is 1 million years. Be careful. You can't say million years ago. They didn't ask you when it lived. They ask you how long did it exist on Earth. Right, so you have to look at that. Colin, these characteristics.
Yeah, before we get to the
yes.
characteristics, it's important if you look at that, it only asks you for 1 mark. But if they ask you to do a or show all your calculations, then you must give the full calculation.
That is so important.
Exactly. So be careful, this is the different type of questions you can expect on a phylogenetic tree. You wanted to say, Lorraine?
No, I wanted to say let's look at 5 characteristics that are shared by all the organisms in the above phylogenetic tree. Now, if we look at them, they are all primates, yes, but we don't see any of the other primates. So we must look at characteristics that these organisms share. And these organisms are already on the transition from other primates towards who and what we are today. So if we look at, let's just go back. Colin, you want to say something? Yes.
There's another possible question, and that is that they can ask you how many genera do you see in that phylogenetic tree, and then of each maybe how many species of each, because that was a question already in an exam paper, so be careful there. You can see we have Homo, we have Australopithecus, and we have Paranthropus. So they so we have 4 different ones. But be
that's
careful.
genera.
Yeah.
And the number of species, of course, you have to count each and every one.
Yes.
Okay, now could we go to the characteristics
Yes,
now?
we can.
This is an interesting diagram, and it has a long list of characteristics, and don't worry if you can't read all of them, but it's a whole list of characteristics, and on the right-hand column they say, what do we share? The humans, the chimps, gorillas, orangutan, monkeys and baboons, and the lower primates. Those are the bush baby and the lemurs, the prosimians in other words. And what is interesting is that we share all of these characteristics with our closest family, the chimpanzees. And by the way, when we talk about our closest family, we share 98.4% of our DNA with chimpanzees. We are very closely related. But there is a difference, of course. And if you look at it, the only characteristics that we don't share with them is the fact that we don't have upper canines that protrude and that are developed into almost fangs and with a gap where we can sharpen them. We also are always bipedal and not quadrupedal. So these characteristics, and we're going to give you a slide where you can see better, these characteristics are shared by all primates, at least the anthropoid primates, the later ones. Carmen, you've got a wonderful slide here. Yes.
Yeah, and this is just one of those things is why are we and why are we regarded as primates? First of all, we have stereoscopic vision, and this we have done with the sense organs. That means that we look with both eyes to an object and we observe it as a solid nature or a 3D object, and we also have rods and cones that make color vision possible for us.
In other words, our chimpanzees, gorillas, etc., can also see in color like we do.
Then the second one is that we don't have claws. For instance, we have naked fingertips, flat nails, and toes. And then a third one, we have an opposable thumb. And if you look at the hand, you can see that 4 fingers shows in one direction and one in the opposite direction, which makes it possible for us to hold on to grab things. But we, as humans, what distinguishes us is that we can take a needle and a thread and we can thread the needle, and that means we have precision grip.
Yeah, that is with the other primates, they have a power grip because of this opposable thumb. But we have the power grip, but we also, as you've said, we have the precision grip. And that is also something that is characteristic of humans. Okay, what else then?
Right, like all other primates, we have pentadactyl hands and feet. We have 5 fingers and 5 toes on each foot and 5 fingers on each hand.
That is actually true for all mammals, or rather all vertebrates, but, well, most of them. But for all mammals, at least, it is totally true. If you go and look at the cat and the dog at home, their 5th toe is not always visible, but they've got it. But as a set of characteristics, it's also part of primates. Yes, and then what about our brain?
Right, we have a large and complicated brain, and which means that our cranium, the part that houses the brain, that's larger. We have a reduced snout, but a poor sense of smell. We have long arms that rotate freely as shoulder joints, which means that we can move our arms in all directions. And then we have very complicated social behavior, one baby at a time for an extended period of time. We have parental care, and if you look at yourself there, grade 12, you think you're big and you still live with your parents.
And some of them will live with their parents for quite a number of years still. So an extremely high degree of parental care in humans. That is what makes us primates, and that we share with chimps and gorillas, orangutans, as we've said. But what makes us different? And Colin, the fact that you say they have to tabulate the anatomical differences is important. And when you have a table, you have to give the characteristics of all of this whole list. You have to say what it looks like in the African apes and what these characteristics look like with the humans. Okay, so let's go through the list.
And since you've seen that I've said they tabulate, that means it comes from their exam guideline document. So if the exam guideline document said you must be able to tabulate, then it is a possible question for the exam. But that doesn't mean that it needs to be given to you in table form, or they will ask you in table form.
But they are allowed to, because it's in the guidelines. what it also means is that if you are required to be able to write a table and they ask you to tabulate, and then you must do it in table form, you actually get a mark for the fact that you wrote it in a table. So that's just sort of another exam tip.
Yeah, so you get an extra mark for drawing the table there. Okay, I'm not going through the list. I'm going through the list as we do the following
So
slides.
don't worry if you didn't write down the list. You don't have to write down anything.
There's the first one in any case.
But this is what we will go through each one on the list. Yeah, bipedalism. Bipedalism means that we walk on 2 feet, that we walk upright. And it brought certain changes in characteristics. On the left, we have the skull of a chimpanzee, Troglodytes, but it's a chimpanzee as seen from below. And that black spot that you see there is the foramen magnum. It is the hole at the bottom of the skull through which the spinal cord connects with the brain. And if you look on the right-hand skull, that is skull of Homo, of humans, you can see that the position of the foramen magnum is much more to the front, while the chimpanzee is much more to the back of the skull. Why? Because the humans have to balance the skull on the spinal cord. We are walking upright. And if we look at the picture here at the bottom, there you can see why the foramen magnum has to be in the middle and why it must be at the back of the skull. Good. If we look at, you can see the picture there of the jaws, the palate, and the teeth, but we will have another picture to show that specifically. At the bottom, Colin, there was an interesting question about the pelvic girdles in end of last year. If we look at these pelvic girdles, bottom left, we can see that the chimpanzee has a pelvic girdle right on the left.
Sorry, Lorraine, for interrupting. Can you just press down Control? Otherwise, we're going straight to the internet.
Okay.
Just Control.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Control here. And where do I find Control? Okay, now you can show me with the arrow.
There we have. Now
on the left, the chimpanzee pelvis. You can see that it's longer than it is wide because of the way that it walks, quadrupedal. On the right, we have the human. It's a more bowl-shaped pelvis. It is shorter and it is wider. In the middle, we have the Australopithecus africanus. Not the same shape as either the chimp or the human. So it's an in-between shape. It's on its way to the human, but it still has some characteristics of the more ape-like chimpanzee, which means that Australopithecus, and you referred to that earlier, is a transitional form. In other words, it shows characteristic of both parts or both fossils, where it comes from. We'll get to that again later. If we look at the shape of the vertebral column, in humans it has quite a few curves. It's actually got 4 curves, so it's more than S-shaped. Why? Because we walk upright, those curves provide a shock absorption function, and it makes us more flexible. If we look at the chimpanzee, it's almost C-shape. They don't need that shock absorbing quality, and they're flexible enough for their own needs. So yes, these are a few of the differences brought about by the fact that we walk upright. In other words, that we have bipedalism. We can also look at the way that the thigh bones, the femur, are attached to the pelvic girdle. You can go and look in your textbooks. And we can also look at the position of the toes, where the big toe in humans is next to the other toes. I'm trying to show you my hand as a little foot. There's my big toe. While in the chimps we have a grasping foot, where the big toe is far apart. I'm not going to take off my shoes now. It's okay.
No,
right.
But we can also see it's an opposable toe. Yes.
Yeah, and then it's an opposable toe. And then with the Australopithecus, an in-between position. So there are a lot. But the ones that we've discussed now are the most important characteristics that you have to know. Sure, I've said a lot, now it's your turn.
No, you've said a lot, but it's important what you've said. I can maybe just add to this that with bipedalism, there are many questions that the examiners can ask you. These are the anatomical evidence for bipedalism. But there are also, and go and look at your textbooks, there are advantages of being bipedal. And what was the advantages of bipedalism for the Australopithecines and for Homo species? It's because they could stand upright now. Now they didn't walk on all four, but now they had free hands. Their hands were free to pick up things and to carry their young and
to go out and forage for food and bring it back to
they
the
could see further,
camp. They could see further over the savannah for possible food, but also possible enemies. And what they also say is that walking upright is a much more efficient energy-saving way of moving. So that was to their benefit. And the fact that when we are bipedal, when we walk upright, the surface that we expose to the sun is much smaller. So it's also a temperature control advantage. So that is also something that you have to go and look at. Brain size.
That's the second one.
It does matter.
It does matter, yes. Now be very careful when you have to explain something about the brain. What you see here is a human skull, and you can also see the skull. And I think we should just go back to the control button, otherwise we're going back to the internet.
You can do
there
that.
We go.
I will hold the control button.
So, but here you see the word the cranium. Now the cranium is what we call the brain box. It's the part that houses the brain. Now, if you look at this, the cranium of the chimpanzee here, you can see how small it is because it houses a smaller brain. And of course, here you can see humans have a larger brain, or rather a larger cranium, which means, and we can derive from that, that the size of the brain has increased because it has a larger cranium. Not the whole skull, because if you can look at this size is much bigger, this frontal part of the skull, than that of humans. So be very careful to use the right terminology here.
We have a bigger cranium to house a bigger brain. And why do we have a bigger brain? Well, what came first? We have a bigger brain because we have more complex thought processes. Our thought processes could become more complex because of this bigger brain. And have a look, remember later on we will talk about why our brains could increase in size.
Here is a question for them.
Yeah.
And the question it reads here, explain the significance of the characteristic of the skull which allowed for the development of the ability to use tools in the Homo species. So there you had to bring in connection the use of tools with the size of the skull.
Which is actually a wrong way, and we said that when we did the memorandum discussion up there, that the person who set the paper actually it should have been cranium.
Cranium, yes.
But you pick up on that.
Because I already warned you, not the whole skull. But what they wanted to actually is so that you can say the cranium is bigger, so that it could accommodate a larger brain.
And the reason why the cranium grew bigger and the brain grew bigger, why it was possible, was a change in diet, where more protein, in other words, meat was eaten. And at first the meat was scavenged, a carcass that was lying there was eaten. But the moment our ancestors started using fire when they cooked food, the food was much softer, much easier to digest, and they could utilize the food more. And that aided the increase of the brain. Colin, I refer to...
this is the slide that you wanted to show.
Yeah. So explaining this, it's such a beautiful picture.
Once again, it's terminology. If they talk about dentition, they talk about your teeth. Okay, so the guideline document says you have to know the differences or the change in the dentition and also the shape of the palate. Now, if you look at the shape here, you can see the chimps. They have a rectangular shape, and you can even see those very large canines there.
Yeah, and they're protruding outwards.
Right. Here you can see the shape of the Australopithecus species. It has changed a bit. It's not as rectangular. It's a little bit more rounded. It's angular.
Yeah, it's not as angular as the chimp.
Yeah, it's not. And you can still see a little bit of protruding canines, but not as huge as those of the chimps. So if we look at the different angles, you can see that the palate, the shape, this is rectangular. We as humans, we have a more curved and rounded palate.
Yeah, those of you who know maths, they say it's parabolic curve.
And there's the question that you refer to. Explain the relationship between the use of fire and changes in dentition in the Homo species. So you need to identify that this is the Homo species, and then you can see the smaller teeth or canines. Here, you can see there, it's in line with the other teeth. Why? Because the food was cooked by using fire, and that is why it was softer. Or you can say that large teeth or canines weren't necessary because of the softer food.
Let's just point at the diastema or the gap between the teeth. There you've got it. Now those gaps, you still find gaps in the chimpanzee, not the gaps in the Australopithecus, not as big, and we don't have those gaps. It's between the incisors and the canines. And the reason for these gaps is that in the chimpanzees, the bottom canines and the top canines would move over each other to be sharpened. We don't need that. And why did they need these fangs or these huge teeth? To tear their food apart. Remember, chimpanzees are omnivores. They also eat meat. They eat mostly plant material, yes, but they will eat meat if and when they can find it. And we also eat meat. We're also omnivores. We eat meat and fruit, etc. But as Colin has said, because our food is cooked, it is softer, and we don't need those very strong, huge teeth. And we don't have to kill our food with our teeth either. Fortunately, I wouldn't have been a good hunter. Can you see me running around? Okay. The prognathis.
Right, here we have three different skulls once again, the one of Australopithecus, the chimp, and the human. Now, if we say prognathis, we look at the large protruding jaw.
We're actually talking about the whole snout.
Yeah. I'm trying to get my arrow here.
There it is.
Oops, noops.
And I was pressing
there we go.
on the control.
Here we have. So, we already spoke about the cranium. Now we talk about the outstanding, can you see, protruding jaws, especially the bottom jaw, which makes that the Australopithecus as well as the chimp, they have a sloping face.
Yeah, and that top, look at that top jaw.
Yeah. And look at the human skull. Because our jaw is not as protruding, and we don't have a protruding jaw, and we have a more flat face. But what you see here is that they don't have a protruding chin, whereas we have one that is protruding, so we have a chin. And you must be able to describe the differences with this between the apes or ape-like humans and the humans. They can refer to the chimps, they can refer to Australopithecus, and then you have to...
Why do we have a chin? Do our learners know why we have a chin? It is to make space for our tongue and for talking. Right? It's because we can talk and our tongue can move inside our mouth. That's why we have a chin. It's a sign of being able to talk. Good. Let's move on.
Okay, and then we get to the cranial ridges and the brow ridges, Lorraine.
Yes, the cranial ridges are huge ridges on the cranium, on the skull, and the brow ridges are these, sort of where you have your eyebrows. Now, the reason why we have these ridges, or why the chimps and some Australopithecus had these ridges, was for muscle attachment. That massive lower jaw, and we'll get back to the picture just now. Look at the muscle there, just show the jaw. Very huge, very big. They had to chew hard nuts and fibrous plant material. And therefore, there were very strong muscles attached to the cranium as well as the brow ridges, helping to chew. And the same with the Australopithecus to a certain extent. We eat softer food, we eat cooked food. Our food is softer, and therefore, over time, it wasn't necessary anymore for these ridges, and over time, they slowly disappeared.
So I hope our learners that pay attention. Now we have the softer food. It has influenced the development of the teeth,
Yeah.
the dentition. It has an effect on the dentition as well as the cranial and brow ridges.
And it also played a role in the increase in brain size. The
Yes.
fact that food was cooked, it also meant that protein-rich meat was available for a longer time. So it wasn't just that you could eat proteins today and maybe in 2 months' time another meal. It meant that you could cook the meat, keep it for 2 or 3 days, so that you had a more regular protein-rich diet. And that's important. Good comparison, this, I think.
Yeah, it is. There we have the human features of the human, and with that of a gorilla. There you can see we have a larger brain. They have a small brain. Look at the small cranium there. Okay, you have the control down. We have small jaws and teeth. They have protruding jaws and very large teeth.
And won't you just point to the pelvis so that they can see why the pelvis...
Yeah. Look at the weight of the body that it has to carry.
And
there,
look
because
at that.
it's on all fours, it's quadrupedal. That is why it doesn't need, it's longer and narrower than that. We are shorter pelvis and a much
Broader,
wider.
yeah.
Yes. And look at we have longer legs and shorter arms. They have long arms and short legs, which is significant of tree climbing too. Okay, so when we're going to look at the different species later on, pay attention to the length of their arms also.
Yeah, that's also why they can walk on all fours. You know how difficult it is for us to walk on all fours. Okay, right.
So, right.
You can move on.
Okay.
There it is.
No, there we
it
have.
is. Now, when we talk about... Okay. You know about Charles Darwin because you had to do natural selection and the theories of Darwin and Lamarck and Aldrich and Gould. Charles Darwin wrote many, many, many books. But he wrote a second book on evolution, The Descent of Man, and it was published in 1871. And one of the things that he said was that mankind originated in Africa. He said that all modern humans originally came from Africa. And today it is called the out of Africa hypothesis. And Colin, I'm sure that very soon they're going to call it the out of Africa theory because of all the various pieces of evidence that are being found to support this. There are other theories as well, or hypotheses, but the out of Africa hypothesis is sort of the most popular one amongst scientists. And we're going to discuss it now, and you have to be able to say what the out of Africa hypothesis is and how it is supported.
Okay, before we get to that, it's quite interesting to know that the day after this book was released and published, then this little picture appeared in the newspapers showing Charles Darwin and the body of a chimpanzee, because people, and especially in England and Europe, they thought that they were the superior race. How can people and how could humans originate on the African continent?
Yeah, and remember at that time, people believed that nothing has ever changed and that everything was as it ever always was. But then Charles Darwin went on his trip, and it was also a time that when people went on trips and they went exploring, and they realized that there were other places in the world with different types of animals, plants, and people. People looking different from the ones that they knew in Europe, but still human beings. And then they realized that there must be something more than what they've always thought. Right.
Okay, if you leave there, then maybe we can go to the next slide.
Let's just give you instructions for the control button. I'm so nervous, I keep my finger on the control button. Okay.
Now, on that little slide, you see that Charles Darwin referred to extinct apes. So if we're going to look at the extinct apes, we look at the fossil record, and this is also what your guideline document says, that you must refer to the fossil record and especially pay attention to the Rift Valley in East Africa as well as the fossils found in South Africa. Now, there's always the problem with this, and that we look at all the fossils that have been found. Now, you must also know where the fossils have been found, who found them, and when they were found. So it's a whole
It's
mouthful.
difficult.
It's difficult. So we have made a list, and all our slides is in a sequence, not necessarily from the oldest fossils to the youngest, but how they were found, and mostly like you can find them in your
Yeah,
textbooks.
well, we talked about this earlier, the fact that our learners, when they are asked for evidence for the out of Africa hypothesis, they always say the first fossils were found in Africa. Now, the first fossils were not found in Africa. First fossils of whatever was found in Europe, but remember, when this is now about out of Africa hypothesis, the oldest fossils of the oldest ancestors were found in Africa. So the oldest, not the first. We know that you actually mean the oldest, but you must write
Yes,
oldest.
you have to. And you know, if you know this, you can actually, you've actually answered the question on the out of Africa
That's the
hypothesis.
first
Yes.
mark that you get.
Yes, because it's the oldest fossils. Where were they found? Nowhere else. So far, the oldest fossils, or dating back to the oldest or the earliest of times that were found.
What would happen if they do find, let's say, one of these fossils in China? Because we know that they are continually finding human or Homo fossils in China.
So
at
you
the
mean
moment.
if they would date a fossil
What-
and it dates later, or it's
earlier,
older,
earlier rather.
and it's older than the
Yeah,
fossils that have been found,
yeah.
then our out of Africa hypothesis is redundant.
Which means that is the reason why there is an out of Africa hypothesis, because the oldest fossils are found in Africa and nowhere else.
Right, let's go into look at the different ones. And the first one you need to know is the genus Ardipithecus and the species Ramidus. There you have about 17 fossils have been found in the Afar Valley in Ethiopia in 1993. And what was significant of this is these fossils showed clearly that they were bipedal, but they were also tree dwellers. How do we know this? Look at the long arms and look at the shorter legs, but look at the opposable big toe as well.
And just look at the time that they lived.
Yeah, it's 5.8 to 4.4 million years ago. Another thing that you need to know, but this they will mostly ask you in a phylogenetic tree. But what you need to know is that yes, the Ardipithecus, they were there. They were very much ape-like still, but they had certain characteristics of the Australopithecine.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
Our learners sometimes might wonder, how can they build, or how can they, remember on the right, it's just an artist's impression. How can they make a picture? It is fascinating, but just from looking at the lower arm fossils that we have in the picture, and the way that the elbow joint is shaped, they can see how big the upper arm was, or how long it was, and how it was attached to the elbow joint. So you have to be an anatomist and you have to know your story, but you can make valid deductions from that. Okay, our next one.
Right, we get to the next genus, Lorraine, the
Australopithecus. Australopithecus really means southern ape. And we know that they're not apes, although we find them in southern Africa, but they are sort of in between. And there are 4 species that you have to know about: Prometheus, Afarensis, Africanus, and Sediba. And what's fantastic is that 3 of them, could we just have the previous slide again? 3 of them, except for Afarensis, the other 3 were all found in South Africa specifically. Okay, let's look at the first one.
Right, but first, before we go there,
Oh, yes.
we promised you that we would look at certain characteristics. Now, all Australopithecus, and we're going to do this with all the genes. Here you see it's the first bipedal primates, which makes it very human-like to the Homo. The foramen magnum, positioned centrally, also very much like humans. The pelvis, short and wide, we already referred to that. Fingers are long and curved, but they still had an opposable big toe, which means that they were also ape-like. Brain was very small, between 380 and 500 cubic centimeters, but a little bit
still larger than apes.
Larger than apes. The dentition, definitely the canines were smaller than those of apes, but still bigger than the humans, and a small diastema. And they still had a protruding jaw, no chin. You see, ape-like, very much. Sloping face, ape-like, and a U-shaped palate with large brow ridges, also ape-like.
But once again, for the last two, a slight change towards Homo. Not quite ape-like, but not quite Homo yet. Right, there's Afarensis. Now, Afarensis, also from the Afar Valley, found by Don Johansen, and in 1974, and nicknamed Lucy. Apparently, while they were working on the bones, the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds of the Beatles played, and they called this fossil Lucy. What was interesting about Lucy is that it really showed both ape-like and more human-like characteristics.
Okay, and Lucy lived between 4.5 to 1.4 million years ago. Here we have Africanus. Here we have the Tahung child, because it was found in Tahung, northwest from Kimberley, lived about 3.2 million years ago. A child of 3 to 4 years, found by Raymond Dart in 1924. And then they thought, let's look for an adult. And yes, they found Mrs. Bliss by Robin Broom in 1947 in the very famous Sterkfontein caves in South Africa. The brain was still as big as a chimp, but what was significant is there were no protruding canines. And then we got to this little one, and that is Littlefoot, Lorraine.
Littlefoot was found by Ron Clark when he looked at a box of bones that was labeled baboon bones, and he found a piece of bone holding in his hand that he realized was not baboon. And he asked his two helpers, Nkwane Molefe and Stephen Motsumi, to go and look. And lo and behold, they found one of the most complete skeletons in the rock in 1997. And that skeleton, it took them more than 10 years to take it out right from the beginning to now. It was taken out of its rock bed last year, and they're busy studying it, and we are waiting anxiously for the information that it will be able to give us. One of the most complete skeletons ever found. And it's even older than Lucy. At this stage, we know that it has lived 3.67 million years ago. So, yes.
And then we get
Sediba.
Yes, Sediba or Karabu, the nickname or, yes, common name, as we say. Found by this little boy, the son, 9-year-old son. He's now old, of course. Matthew, the son of Professor Lieberger of Wits University, also in Malapa, or part of the cradle of the humankind. And these, here you can see Sediba. They say this might be the direct ancestor of the Homo species.
Yeah, quite frankly, there are some researchers who thought it must be a Homo. It's the jury is still out on that. Right, and there you can see the skull. Here at the back, that looks like a chainmail neck scarf is actually still rock that was still attached to it. And you can see it was two individuals, a woman and a younger male, might be a mother and son, for all we know.
Long arms still, eh?
Yeah.
Okay.
And yes, lots of things that they could see. Other pieces has also been found. And there's Lee Berger. And remember, we talked about the pelvis earlier and how it's on its way towards the Homo pelvis.
And you can see John Gertsch's, what he thinks that Sediba must have looked like. Okay, look at the small hand bones in if you compare it to that of.
But just the shape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you must also know the distribution of all the Australopithecines and all the fossils that were found in Africa. And there you can go and look at all the different places that is for Lucy and Ardipithecus ramidus. That was found in Ethiopia there in Afar Valley. Then you can see the Tahung child here. And then Littlefoot, you can see, and Mrs. Bliss here at the Sterkfontein caves, and Sediba at Malapa, part of the cradle of humankind.
And if you look at the picture on the right, you can see there's almost a line of fossil sites.
Yeah, there you can see.
But we found fossils in other places as well.
Oh, yeah.
And southern Africa is extremely rich in fossil sites, and especially in human ancestors. And it's a richness that we have.
And be careful if they ask you some fossils that were found in South Africa, and that is why this map is very important, so that you can see that Lucy, for instance, was not found in South Africa. Okay, so make sure that you also know the common names. Okay, we have to move on a little bit, and
Sorry.
so if you can just leave there, and then we can go to, and we get to the homos. There we have the Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, and Homo sapiens. General characteristics, we are going to rush a little bit. We have like less than 5 minutes left for you. The bipedal, the foramen magnum, directly above the vertebral column. Also short and wide pelvis. Longer arms than there you can see the legs are now longer and the arms are shorter. And because of longer legs, so that they can stride and walk on the two legs. Non-opposable big toe, that means no longer tree dwellers, larger brain. Definitely you can see almost double in size, 600 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. And then no protruding canines, no diastema, prominent chin and flat face, just like us.
Yeah, well, you were describing the
us.
two of us.
Exactly.
If we look at Homo habilis, it was the first to use tools. That's why it was found in Tanzania, a few fossils. Homo erectus.
Just because they sometimes ask that question, Homo habilis, handyman. Remember, that is why it's called Homo habilis.
Yeah, it was the first one to use tools, and then erectus was the one to migrate from Africa to Europe, and first to Asia and then to Africa, Europe.
Yeah, and sometimes they ask Homo erectus, and here you can see the Homo habilis. They lived also more or less, you can see, they overlapped and lived at the same time. But why is it that they were more effective also? Is because they could also, they used their tools better, and they started hunting in groups, and that made them also more successful. The Homo neanderthalensis lived about 230,000 to 30,000 years ago. The first one was found, can you see the first fossil? This is in 1856. Doesn't mean that it was one of the oldest fossils. And it was found in Germany. There you can see the skull, long and flat, broad nose, prominent brow ridges still, but they were also lighter and fairer in skin. They had the largest brain, but they didn't use language because they have a very flat frontal part. They wore clothes, they built shelters, but that showed that there was some kind of culture developing already. They buried their dead. Right, and then it comes to Homo sapiens, about 200,000 years. That is, and they are the direct ancestors of us as modern humans. They developed better skills, advanced technology, because they made tools of both stone and bone. You can see the larger brain, it's a 1,400 cubic centimeter and more. They wore clothes of leather and plant materials. They formed communities, and they looked at, and they wore jewelry because they liked to, the personal adornment. They painted their bodies, and this is one of the oldest cultural artifacts that we have found in the Blombos area, and this is just a piece of ochre, but whatever those little stripes and carvings mean, we don't know, but that is just to show that it must have been some kind of spiritual or ritual ceremony used in some ceremony. And the out of Africa hypothesis, it says that all modern humans originated in Africa, and from Africa they have moved to, or out of Africa to Europe and Asia. Now, this was a question, explain how the location and the age of Homo fossils are used as evidence for the out of Africa hypothesis. Remember, your oldest fossils of Homo habilis and Homo erectus are only found in Africa. All the younger fossils dating back, that is much younger, they were found out of Africa and other parts of the world. And what does this imply? It tells us that the Homo species evolved in Africa, and from Africa they migrated out of Africa to Europe and Asia. And yes, and then also some genetic evidence. We're going to refer to the mitochondrial DNA. Remember, the mitochondrial DNA, of the father, it is in the middle piece and not where the DNA of the nucleus is, not the nuclear DNA. So when this head enters the egg cell, it breaks off, which means the mitochondria never enters the egg cell, and that is why the mitochondrial DNA that we have in our bodies, we have it was handed down from our mothers to all children. That means to boys and girls. And by following all the mutations and the number of mutations in the nucleotides of the mitochondrial DNA, we can actually follow the female lineage, the line of descent. So the more mutations we have, the more or the older that organism or that species is. So this is how we do the mitochondrial DNA. So yes,
Darwin was right.
yeah.
Africa is indeed the home of humanity.
Yeah, and I think that as evidence, it says more than enough that the home of humanity is Africa. So yes, and this brings us to the end of
Goodbye and good luck with your record exams.